Dr. Adesina, let's get to him. In a packed auditorium at Chatham House, African Development Bank Group President Dr. Adesina delivered an impassioned speech to a diverse audience, emphasizing Africa's vast potential and abundant opportunities. Here's an excerpt.
It is equally auspicious that I'm also speaking to you today, a few days after the annual meetings of the African Development Bank Group that we held in very beautiful city of Nairobi, Kenya. There, our shareholders unanimously approved an additional $117 billion increase in the capital of the African Development Bank Group. This follows an earlier general capital increase of the bank, which raised the capital of the bank from $93 billion, where I met it when I came, to $201 billion in 2019. This new capital injection last week brings the capital of the bank to $318 billion. So you can understand that in the context of changing global financial architecture that we've been asked to do, we're going to be bigger, bolder, and better. The historic increase in the financial capacity shows the confidence of our shareholders in African Development Bank's vision for Africa and our resolve and commitment to accelerate its growth and development, I must add, relentlessly. They did so because our high fives, which are the priorities of the bank, to light up and power Africa. You all know about that, I guess, to feed Africa, to integrate Africa, to industrialize Africa, and to improve the quality of life of the people of Africa. That's what we call the high fives at the African Development Bank. They have impacted on over 400 million people in the last 8 years. This newly injected capital will allow us to do more. It is therefore with great excitement of the wind in the sails of the African Development Bank that I am delighted to speak to you today on envisioning Africa's economic prospects. Ladies and gentlemen, the New York Times recently had as its headlines, "The future is African." I agree, of course, with the New York Times. Africa can no longer be ignored. I fully expect Africa to be the pivotal continent in the world, given its economic prospects. First, Africa's population is projected to reach 2.5 billion by 2050. And by then, 1 in every 4 persons on Earth will be African. With rising middle class and projected consumer and, of course, business expenditures projected to reach over $7 trillion, this is a formidable market of the future you cannot ignore. Second, with its burgeoning youth population of almost 1 billion people under the age of 35, Africa will boom with talented skills and form the workforce of the world. Third, with 65% of the uncultivated arable land left to feed 9.5 billion people in the world, it's not in Asia, it's not Latin America, it's not in Europe, it's not in China, it's in Africa. So what Africa does with agriculture is going to absolutely determine the future of food in the world. Fourth, the future of energy transition for a world powered largely with renewable energy will actually depend on Africa, because Africa has the largest solar potential in the world, which of course will be critical for developing green hydrogen and green ammonia that will power economies of the world towards net zero emissions. Africa also has the largest deposits of green metals and minerals, from platinum to copper, nickel, manganese, chromium, graphite, and lithium, which of course are all critical for manufacturing of solar panels, battery energy storage systems, and electric vehicles. And the value of those electric vehicles by 2025 will be $7 trillion. By 2050, it will be worth $57 trillion. Fifth, the African Continental Free Trade Area, which of course brings together all 54 African countries, with an estimated GDP of $3.4 trillion, is on its way to becoming, actually, the largest free trade zone in the world in terms of number of participating countries. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, economic trends, growth and development of Africa are central as we look to a world where the continent will play a very significant role. Ladies and gentlemen, despite challenges of COVID-19 pandemic, geopolitical risks, high food and energy prices, and the rising global interest rates, African countries are showing economic resilience. Africa's real GDP growth rate increased from 3.1% in 2022 to 3.7% in 2023 and to 4.3% projected for 2025, according to a report of the African Economic Outlook that we released last week at our annual meetings of the African Development Bank. Africa is the second fastest growing region in the world, second only to Asia, and has actually 10 out of the 20 fastest growing countries in the world. As Africa's economic resilience is bolstered, unlocking its economic prospects that we're talking about requires ensuring structural change of its economies, raising the productivity of agriculture, so we're always back to agriculture, provision of electricity, accelerating infrastructure investments, and supporting fast-paced digitalization, unleashing economic and job opportunities for women and youth, and driving industrialization through greater mobilization of the private sector. Assuring food security in Africa is top on the agenda for the African Development Bank. Of course, as you know, I'm an agricultural economist and the first one ever to have come from an agricultural background to lead a global multilateral development bank. So, you know, agriculture is it at the front of the agenda. It's in my genes. Over the past 8 years, we have provided close to $10 billion in support of our flagship initiatives in agriculture. One of our top flagship initiatives is called Technologies for African Agricultural Transformation. In other words, it's called TAAT. It has delivered climate-smart agricultural technologies for over 13 million farmers. And one of the ones is in Ethiopia. And when I spoke with Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Abiy at the time, I told him that we got the technologies that can allow Ethiopia to become entirely self-sufficient in wheat. And it's called heat-tolerant wheat varieties. We gave it to them, 65,000 metric tons we gave to them. Now, if you want to understand what 65,000 metric tons is, think of an A380 aircraft. In terms of the passengers you have, in terms of the cargo load you have on the fuel, that's essentially 94.3 tons, that's it. So when I say 65,000 metric tons of seed, think of that as like having 665 A380 aircraft, Airbuses on a landing strip. That's how much, that's in terms of volume of seed. They started and they grew it on 5,000 hectares in 2018. Last year, they grew it on 2.2 million hectares. In less than 4 years, Ethiopia became 100% self-sufficient in wheat. That's a record. And so if you can do that in Ethiopia, there's no doubt in my mind that we can do it absolutely everywhere. The African Development Bank is also developing what I call special agro-industrial processing zones. We're doing those in 11 countries to support agro-industrialization and value addition and the development of agricultural value chains. You see, the size of the food and agricultural market in Africa is going to reach $1 trillion by 2030. And Africa cannot and should not continue to export primary commodities. The door to poverty is the export of primary commodities. The highway to wealth is value addition. And therefore, whether it's cocoa, whether it's coffee, whether it's tea, whatever it is that we have, we've got to not be at the bottom of that value chain. We must be at the top of that value chain. And that is why, without consolidated infrastructure that will drive structural transformation of agriculture, that's not going to happen. That's why we are investing heavily in these special agro-industrial processing zones to unlock that value for us. And of course, unlocking Africa's renewable energy resources and assuring energy supply, access, and security is fundamental for Africa's economic prosperity.